Okay, everybody, so welcome to a special episode of Movie Punditry's Random Rewatch. This is 1979 in review. As you may know, we have a window in which we do our movies. They have to be at least 20 years old and a maximum of 45 years old. So every January, one of the years will go out. In this case, it's 1979. And, you know, one of the things I say about movies is that they have to, I don't care what they do, but they have to be consistent to their own internal logic and their own rules. And this podcast is no different. So our rule is once a movie is 46 years old, it's off the list. So these are films that we're not going to do anymore. But 1979 was a really impressive year for films. And I just wanted to maybe just recap a couple of films that really stood out to me as being significant or important. These aren't necessarily the best films of the year. They didn't win any Best Picture Oscars. There's nothing like some of them are very successful box office films, but these are more just films that really personally touched me and hit me in a particular way, excluding, of course, Alien, which we did last week. But I'm going to go over 5 more films just real quick and just touch base on them. And maybe you've seen them, maybe you haven't, but they're old enough that I would think that a lot of people maybe haven't seen them. So maybe you want to give them a look. So the first film that I want to talk about is maybe kind of an odd one coming from me, but it is Bob Fosse's All That Jazz.
Candy Casey, very good. You're going to do it again, Victoria. Stop smiling. It's not the high school play.
So this is kind of a semi-autobiographical film that Fosse had written. He was in the early 1970s. He was working on directing both a film called Lenny, which is a story about the life of comedian Lenny Bruce, starring Dustin Hoffman, and he was also working on choreography for the 1975 stage play of Chicago on Broadway, starring Cheetah Rivera and Gwen Verdon and Jerry Orbach. Yes, that Jerry Orbach. Lenny Briscoe from Law & Order was a song and dance man back in the day, and he originated the role of Billy Flynn in Chicago on Broadway. So in the midst of directing this movie and choreographing the stage play, Bob Fosse had a massive heart attack and really almost died. So, and he had open heart surgery, and he started to write the story about a near-death experience and marital problems, and ultimately found it to be too depressing, and then kind of converted it into a story about his own life and his experiences in doing Lenny and Chicago and having this massive heart attack, which is basically what the story came out to be. And it's kind of a semi-musical in that it's based on him choreographing a play, and there's a lot of musical numbers in it. There's a lot of diegetic music in it, but there's also some non-diegetic music in it towards the end of it when it goes through this whole kind of fantasy sequence, including this really great song with Ben Vereen.
Bye bye love, bye bye sweet caress, hello emptiness, I feel like I could die. Bye bye your life goodbye, bye bye my life goodbye, bye bye your life. Which is really kind of catchy, and it's kind of it's juxtaposed with this dancing and him going through surgery and this imagined musical number in his head. It's really so well done and so evocative. And of course, there's other very Fosse-esque musical numbers in it. Most notably, the "Take Off With Us" number, which, if you're going to watch this movie, don't watch it with the kids.
Lean back, relax. Welcome Welcome aboard Erotica.
Flying not only coast to coast,
but anywhere your desires and fantasies wish to take you.
So this movie stars Roy Scheider as Joe Gideon, who is the stand-in for Bob Fosse in this film. It was originally offered to Paul Newman, and Newman turned it down and had said much later that he absolutely regretted turning it down. Other characters in the story closely resemble people in Bob Fosse's life. The character of Audrey, who is Joe Gideon's ex-wife, is an analog for Gwen Verdon, who is Bob Fosse's ex-wife, and who worked on him with projects like Chicago, also worked on this film as well. Anne Ranking basically plays herself. She was someone who was involved with Fosse, and she was a dancer and a choreographer herself, and she choreographed some later productions of Chicago. Cliff Gorman, who played the comic in the film within a film version of Lenny that Joe Gideon is working on. He had actually originated the role of Lenny Bruce in the stage production of Lenny, which Dustin Hoffman played in the film. So you have Joe Gideon, who is making a movie in the film based on a stand-up comedian, and is also choreographing a rather risque stage play at the same time, and then undergoes a heart attack. This is Bob Fosse's life in general in the early 1970s. And this is really a fantastic film. Nominated for Best Picture, Best Director. Roy Scheider was nominated for Best Actor. It was nominated for Best Screenplay, Best Cinematography. It did not win any of those. It did win Art Direction, Costume Design, Film Editing, Original Score. The music categories in the late 70s were a little different than they are today. I think there was like basically one category for it. So this is a film definitely worth checking out. If you've never seen it, you've never heard of it, absolutely check out All That Jazz. The next film is The Black Hole. This is Disney's foray into hard science fiction. And, Disney throughout the 1970s had done some kind of comedy sci-fi films, The Cat from Outer Space, stuff like that, Escape from Witch Mountain. But this is really kind of their foray into getting into, let's actually make a big budget blockbuster film, especially in the wake of Star Wars, in the wake of films like Close Encounters or even Jaws. The idea that a film can make a ton of money and have, really long legs and be in a theater for a long time. This is the fence that Disney was swinging for. I remember being a kid and going to Disney in, the late 70s, 77, 78, and seeing all the promotions that they were doing, especially in Tomorrowland, for this film, and being so excited for this film to come out.
Welcome aboard the Cygnus. Consider yourselves my guests.
You've lived out here for 20 years? Alone?
I've created companions of a sort.
We can offer you the means of returning to Earth, Doctor.
What makes you think I want to return? I will travel where no man has dared to go.
Into the black hole? Why, that's crazy.
This movie really kind of, just like Close Encounters, kind of really put the idea of alien visitors on the map. This movie kind of put black holes in the zeitgeist, and people really started to become interested in these things, even though its depiction of a black hole is scientifically absolutely ridiculous, including the part where they travel through the black hole at the end. Spoiler on a 45-year-old movie, where they travel through the black hole at the end and wind up in some kind of, I don't know if they're in hell or wherever they are, but yeah, this is a really great movie, and the effects on it for the day, the robot Maximilian was really frightening.
This is the story to end all stories, Harry. A ship of robots and computers with this thing in charge.
Not quite, Dr. Durant. Maximilian and my robots only run this ship the way I wish it run.
How do you know my name?
You were monitored ever since our sensors first detected you. Now, Maximilian, calm down. Don't pick on small people. He's such a nice
giant floating robot with whirling blades for hands, who never spoke, just kind of glared at you with that single red eye. It was really kind of a scary thing, and especially, at the end where they go through and now you see Maximilian and you see like eyes inside and you don't know what that's supposed to be. Is that supposed to be Reinhardt? Is that supposed to be Kate McRae's father? Is it supposed to be somebody else? Who knows what's going on there? The idea that all these robots are actually people and Reinhardt is using this crew in like the zombified state to go and travel through the black hole.
We can offer you the means of returning to Earth, Doctor.
What makes you think I want to return? I will travel where no man has dared to go.
Into the black hole? Why, that's
It was just really kind of crazy stuff at the time. The director, Gary Nelson, he was kind of a Disney director. He had done a couple of films for Disney at the time. They were really looking to make like a disaster movie in space. Disaster movies were all the rage in the 1970s, whether it was Airport Movie or The Towering Inferno or The Poseidon Adventure or Earthquake, or there were always some kind of disaster movies. They were big news. So this idea of putting a disaster movie in space was really popular. Sigourney Weaver, who we talked about in Alien, had actually been up for the role of Kate in this film, but some Disney executive thought that her name was too weird, and so they didn't hire her. The role went to actually Jennifer O'Neill, who was a pretty big star at the time. However, apparently, after she was offered the role, she got involved in a drunk driving car accident and was not able to do the role, and so it went to Yvette Mimieux. This is the first film in Hollywood history to have a digitally recorded film score. It was not recorded to analog tape. It was recorded to a computer. They tried to get Industrial Light and Magic, who had done all the effects for Star Wars, to do the effects for this. Especially, they were interested in the motion control system that had been invented. I think John Dykstra did that. And ILM was not available at the time. I don't know if they were working on Empire or they were working on, I know they were doing some work for Paramount on Star Trek, I think. Disney wound up going back to its own engineering and film people and inventing its own system called ACES, which is its own motion control system, and they did all the effects in-house. Disney at the time, was a huge motion picture studio. It's kind of bifurcated now. There's multiple studios under the Disney umbrella, but Walt Disney Pictures back in the day was a really big, powerful studio, and they had a lot of resources going on. So they developed their own technology to do this film, their models, their motion control system. Everything that you see in this film is done in camera. And the effects, they're a little cheesy for a modern audience, but if you put them in kind of the context of the film and when it came out, in the day, these were amazing effects. The shot of the meteor rolling through the center of the ship and our characters kind of running to escape it was really an amazing shot. The cast in this thing was really top notch. You had Maximilian Schell, who was a well-known actor, Ernest Borgnine, who was a disaster movie staple, and Tony Perkins, who people remember from Psycho, but it was in a bunch of other movies. Robert Forster. This is a pretty heavy-hitting cast. And Roddy McDowall as the voice of Vincent the robot. I know it's kind of cheesy, but if you're a sci-fi completist, you definitely need to put The Black Hole on your list, and it's probably playing on Disney Plus. I think it's like the first movie I watched when Disney Plus launched, because I hadn't seen it in probably 25 years. Joseph Kosinski, who is the director of films like Tron Legacy and Oblivion, and recently Top Gun Maverick, has been supposedly attached to do a remake of The Black Hole for almost a decade. Apparently he had written a treatment to it. I can't even imagine what this would look like. I mean, he is one of the most amazing visual storytellers that's working today. The idea that Joe Kosinski is doing a remake of The Black Hole is really exciting. I don't know if it's ever going to happen. Disney, after what happened with Tomorrowland, really kind of got shy about kind of this non-franchise sci-fi stuff. They canceled Tron Legacy's sequel, although there is a film being made now. Hopefully someday it'll come to fruition, because I would love to see Kosinski's take on it. So next is a film that I remember seeing for the first time probably when I was in high school in the mid-'80s, early 80s, and this was a big video store favorite of a lot of people. This is Walter Hill's classic gang drama, The Warriors.
Are the armies of the night.
Can you dig it?
The Furies, the Boppers, the Hi-Hats, the Lizzies, the Turnbull ACs, the Gramercy Riffs, and these are the Warriors.
We know about the Warriors. They're a heavy outfit.
They're from Coney Island.
Warriors. You guys are the big dudes, huh?
Now they're in the Bronx.
We're going back.
27 miles behind
This film was
enemy
based
lines.
on a 1965 novel called The Warriors by an author named Saul Urich, which in itself is based on the classic Greek story Anabasis, which is written by Xenophon. It tells a story of the 10,000 mercenaries hired by Cyrus the Younger to help him take the throne of Persia from his brother, and how they are caught up in enemy territory after Cyrus is killed and have to find their way back to Greece. This is kind of the structural basis of the story of the novel and then of its adaptation in this film. So there, you learn some ancient Greek history. Who says that the Movie Punditry Podcast is not here to educate? The rights were obtained by American International Pictures in '69, but they let the rights lapse. They never developed the film. It got kicked around a little bit. Finally wound up with Lawrence Gordon. He set up with David Shaber to write the script. They wanted, from the beginning, Walter Hill in on it. Walter Hill was he was a screenwriter who had worked with Gordon on Hard Times and The Driver as director. Hard Times was his first film as a director in 1975. He was a producer on Alien, and he wanted to direct this film, but he was basically of the mind that no studio would let them make the film because he thought it was just going to be too violent and too weird, and nobody would really sink their money into it. But Gordon took the film to Paramount. Paramount at the time was really interested in making films that appealed to younger audiences, so they agreed to finance this film. They put it on a really accelerated timetable. They greenlit this film in like the late spring, early summer of 1978, and this film hit theaters in February of 1979. So there was less than a year turnaround from greenlighting this film to this film hitting theaters, which is a really, really accelerated timetable, especially for a film that's done mostly on location. Hill wanted to make the film look like a comic book, and have like chapters with artwork in between the chapters. The budget and the production time would not allow that to happen. I think he eventually wound up doing that in like a director's edition later on. But as this film hit the theaters, it was really tight. It was really stripped down. It's a brisk 92 minutes, including credits. So it's probably like 88 minutes of actual runtime of the film. Really tight, really fast-paced, really small budget, $4 million budget. Wound up making $22 million in the box office. Made a lot more than that later years in home video rentals and then getting put onto television. It seemed like this film was on a lot on like pay TV and things like that. They did a lot of casting sessions in New York for this film. One of the funny things, ironically funny things, is they had been considering Sigourney Weaver, I guess, for the role of Mercy. That's like another time that she pops up. She's getting a lot of looks in this at 1978 or so. But they had been looking at Sigourney Weaver. She had been in a movie, in an Israeli movie called Madman with Michael Beck, and in kind of researching her and looking at her performance in Madman, they wound up really liking Michael Beck for Swan and wound up casting him as the lead in this film. In the book, none of the main characters are white, but Paramount did not want an all-minority cast for, 1970s reasons, I guess. And so Michael Beck obviously was the lead in this. James Remar had another prominent role. The studio wanted Tony Danza for the role of Vermin, but he wasn't available because he was working on Taxi. Walter Hill originally wanted a Puerto Rican actress for the role of Mercy, but Deborah Van Valkenburg was great in her audition, and her agent was able to convince Hill to cast her. She would get cast the next year in the comedy Too Close for Comfort, which was starring Ted Knight, and would become pretty popular. I mean, some of the people in this film were pretty much 80s staples. James Remar, who we talked about, obviously he had a big role as Gantz in 48 Hours. David Patrick Kelly, who played Luther in this, we'll talk about him in a minute. He went on to play Sully in Commando. Lynn Thigpen has been a staple. She plays the DJ. All you see is her mouth as she talks. She kind of has this way of like talking in code, but you get the feeling she's like part of like the gang underworld, but she talks in code over broadcast radio.
News off the street boppers. The baseball furies dropped the ball, made an error. Our friends are on second base and trying to make it all the way home. But the inside word is that the odds are against them. Stay tuned, boppers. Stay tuned.
Thomas Waits, who played Fox, apparently he did not get along very well with Walter Hill. Apparently it got so bad that Walter Hill went to the stunt coordinator and said, look, just set up a scene where we're going to kill Fox off. Originally the guy didn't want to do it, but the guy, Walter Hill's the director, so they filmed this scene without Waits where Fox gets killed, pushed into a subway car, and that was the end of him in the movie. And he wound up having his name taken off the movie. It was a whole big, Hollywood thing. David Patrick Kelly apparently improvised the, famous Warriors Come Out and Play thing with the beer bottles.
Warriors come out to play. Warriors come out to play. Warriors come out to play. Warriors come out to play.
I guess they were shooting the scene and they felt like Walter Hill felt like he needed something, and they were trying different stuff, and Kelly wound up like going underneath the boardwalk and finding these beer bottles and came out just doing the thing like the Warriors come out and play, and Hill loved it. He's like, that's it, we're gonna shoot it, let's shoot it. And that's how that iconic scene got into the movie. This film was shot entirely in New York on location. The only scene I think that was not on location was the bathroom fight. That was actually in a built set, but it was in New York. At least one of the locations had to get shut down because there was a double homicide. New York City in the late 70s was not what you would expect today from New York City. That whole Summer of Sam, the Bronx is burning. This is all during that time. It was a pretty dark place, and there was a lot of crime. The scene in the Bronx, which was not filmed in the Bronx, in that crowd, there were actual gang members from various gangs in New York, as well as a bunch of off-duty New York cops. Apparently, there were some tension back and forth between some of the gang members and some of the production crew and cast. They went out there, they shot it. They didn't use a lot of Hollywood people. It was a lot of New York people. They couldn't use any stuntmen from Hollywood. They were all it was all local talent other than the stunt coordinator. He had to the scene where Cyrus gets shot, he had to do that scene himself, the stunt coordinator, because he couldn't bring any of real stuntmen in. It was just it was not the way a lot of films are made today. When this film was released in February of 79, there were actually incidents at a lot of movie theaters where like gang members would show up to see the film, and then that would cause a problem with, people who were coming. But eventually that kind of settled down a little bit. Reviews were typically negative, but not entirely. It was kind of up and down. Film was rated X in France and was censored in a lot of communities. It's kind of become a bit of a cult film. One of the things that Walter Hill feels was really positive about this film was that it was the first time that gang life was treated as a positive for young people. It was like a way for them to pull themselves out of poverty and despair and having nothing to do. It was the sense of brotherhood, the sense of community versus, it's just, these guys are hooligans. It's a social problem. It's, something to be looked down on. Like he really kind of looked at both sides of the gang situation in a very balanced way and in a very realistic way. That kind of reflected in the film's stature, especially going forward. Apparently at the time of his death in 2012, for a few years, Tony Scott had been working on a remake of this film. I would have loved to have seen that. I love Tony Scott's films. He's probably my favorite director in terms of batting average, and he would have made a remarkable version of this film, I think. It's too bad we lost him. Next up, Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now, his epic Vietnam War movie.
And about a mile out, we'll put on the music. Use Wagner. My boys love it.
Francis Ford Coppola presents Apocalypse Now with Marlon Brando, Robert Duvall, Martin Sheen. Experience Apocalypse Now, and you will never need to go to war.
It was written mainly by John Milius, who was a pretty well-known writer. He had done Devil's Eight, Life and Times of Judge Bean, Jeremiah Johnson. He would go on to direct Conan the Barbarian and Red Dawn and some other films. The other writer on the film was Michael Herr, who was a Vietnam War correspondent, so he contributed, into the realism of the script as far as the story goes. So Milius had been convinced by George Lucas and Steven Spielberg to write a Vietnam War movie. He decided to adapt Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. It's a very loose adaptation. You can certainly see in its bones, you could see where it comes from. Heart of Darkness obviously takes place in Africa. They're going up the Congo River, but it's a very similar story thematically. In fact, there's a great documentary on this film. It's one of the best documentaries about the making of a film in existence, and it's called Hearts of Darkness. And I would really recommend, if you like this film, I would really recommend watching that documentary because it really gets down into the nitty-gritty of how this film was made. And it is a crazy story. So Francis Ford Coppola is kind of, at this point in the 1970s, he's kind of a mentor to a lot of these up-and-coming directors, guys out of USC Film School, Spielberg, George Lucas, Milius, Brian De Palma, even Scorsese. And his production company, American Zoetrope, a lot of them had worked on and off with him on various projects. In fact, in this film was originally supposed to be directed by George Lucas, but Lucas decided to take his time and go on and work on Star Wars. So that probably worked out for him. Milius wound up writing like 10 drafts of the film. It eventually got to be 1,000 pages, which is absolutely crazy for a screenplay. Typically, rule of thumb is a page per minute. So, yeah, you're talking about like a 15, 16 hours worth of film that they had to whittle down to something manageable. This film, they actually started writing it during the Vietnam War. They started writing it in the 60s. It had gotten purchased. By 1969, it was in turnaround. Warner Brothers picked it up. And Lucas did work on the film for like 4 years, working on developing the story and putting the film together. They were going to start shooting in 1971. Gary Kurtz, who's one of the producers, went to the Philippines to start looking for places to shoot. Things just got delayed. By the mid-70s, like 75, they're looking in like Florida for places to shoot the film. Coppola decided that the Philippines was still the better idea. He went and talked to President Ferdinand Marcos personally to get permission to film in the Philippines. By now, distribution was with United Artists, and by the mid-late 70s, they're getting ready to shoot this thing. Coppola originally wanted Steve McQueen to play Willard. McQueen did not want to go and live in the Philippines for the amount of time it would take to shoot the movie. Also, Coppola didn't want to pay him what his quote was. Losing McQueen cost him a bunch of his advance money that he had gotten to make the film. Al Pacino was involved in a while, and then he dropped out because he didn't want to go live in the jungle because he had done it during Godfather 2, and he decided he wasn't going to do that again. A lot of people were attached to this. Jack Nicholson, Redford, Keith Carradine, Tommy Lee Jones, Nick Nolte, James Caan. So Martin Sheen had screen tested for the role of Michael Corleone in The Godfather, and Coppola remembered him, so Coppola brought him in to screen test. But originally they had wound up casting Harvey Keitel. Harvey Keitel wound up dropping out. Then they brought in Sheen. As far as Kurtz's role, they had talked to Orson Welles, they had talked to Lee Marvin. Neither one of them wanted to do it. They finally convinced Marlon Brando to do it. They paid him $2 million plus 10% of the theatrical rentals and 10% of the TV rights. So he made out pretty good for, a month's work, where he basically stood in a room and read lines off cue cards.
Are you an assassin? I'm a soldier. You're neither. You're an errand boy, sent by grocery clerks to collect a bill.
And, of course, we've got an early appearance by Harrison Ford for a couple of minutes at the beginning of the movie. You have to watch the documentary for all the details on it, but the short of it is that basically a typhoon came through in the middle of production and completely destroyed most of the sets. The bombing thing with the napalm and stuff, like they basically lit half the Philippines on fire. I'm exaggerating, of course, but there was a lot of destruction done by the production crew. People got sick. It was really kind of a crazy situation going on there. But let's talk about the film itself. Like this is one of the most iconic war films that have been made, in the Hollywood era in the last, probably since the Vietnam War, if not in the history of film. This is going to be ranked probably in the top 5 in anybody's list of war films. And it's one of the first times that people really took a good hard look at war and didn't try to paint it as, some kind of rah, look at our heroes go. Even films like Bridge on the River Kwai, which really shined a light on the treatment of soldiers who were being held as prisoners of war, or a film like All Quiet on the Western Front or something. This is an unashamed look at the hell of war and what it does to people, and that was a very unusual thing. I mean, we see this kind of stuff all the time now, but at its day, this was really a very uncomfortable look at what war was like. And this film opened up the doors for films like Full Metal Jacket or Platoon or Hamburger Hill or Saving Private Ryan or all these other films that kind of came in its wake. This film had kind of really mixed reviews when it came out, but its legacy, it is really considered to be kind of a masterpiece, especially when you think of films from like the 1960s on. AFI put it on its 100 Years, 100 Movies list at number 28. I Love the Smell of Napalm in the Morning was number 12 on AFI's list of great movie quotes.
You smell that? Napalm, son. Nothing else in the world smells like that. I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
This film's on a lot of lists of top war movies, and it's inspired a bunch of copycats and memes and homages in other movies and other forms of cinema. It was nominated for picture, director, actor in a supporting role, screenplay, adapted screenplay, art direction, film editing. It won cinematography, best sound. It won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, where Duvall and Coppola also won. It was nominated for film, actor, supporting actor, director, music, cinematography, editing, production design, soundtrack, foreign film at the BAFTA Awards, where it won supporting actor, director. So yeah, this is really not only one of the top movies of 1979, it is one of the top movies ever, and it is a must-see. This has to be on your list if you even consider yourself a film fan, because of all the legacy that is attached to this movie. And so the final film is, if you know me at all, you know it's coming. The human adventure's just beginning.
Thrusters ahead, Mr. Sulu. Take us out. Mr. Spock, every minute brings that object closer to Earth. I need you.
I am convinced we are inside a living machine.
Star Trek the Motion Picture. So I was a huge Star Trek fan back in the 70s. The show was canceled after its initial 3-year run due to low ratings, and then Paramount sold it off for syndication, and it became hugely successful. Was sold in over 150 markets, was on all the time. For myself, WPIX in New York was running it at least every Saturday night, and I think they sometimes ran it during the week. It was constantly on. It was just a big thing for me. Like my first, quote, big boy book without pictures was the James Blish and Alan Dean Foster Star Trek novelizations. It was huge. So when this film came out in 1979, 12-year-old me was sitting in the Ridgeway Theater on opening weekend watching this thing, literally tears running down my face at the flyby of the Enterprise, because it was just so amazing to see this on screen, these huge visuals, this massive, screen with the Enterprise on it. Jerry Goldsmith's amazing score. This score is one of the most incredible scores ever in a motion picture. It's also one of the last two films that had an actual overture for many, many years. And it's just an incredible piece of music. So I was all geared up for this. This was a really huge film back in the day. With the, big uptake in its kind of a cult following in the 70s, books were starting to come out, pocketbooks were starting to make original novels. The show was in syndication all the time, and sci-fi conventions were starting to become a thing. There was a big groundswell for, Star Trek for this property. So Gene Roddenberry, the creator, had been pitching a movie as early as 1968, but certainly in the early 70s, as a sequel to the original TV series. Actually, let me correct that. He started the initial pitch in the 68 was for a prequel film. By mid-1970s, 74, 75 or so, he had come up with the idea of pitching a sequel, and the story is very famously referred to as The God Thing, which is a story about an interdimensional alien who shows up in our galaxy, declares himself God, and starts heading for Earth. And Kirk gets the crew of the Enterprise together again after their 5-year mission, and they go off and intercept this alien, and intergalactic hijinks begin. The idea was ultimately rejected in 1976 by Paramount, mainly on, at least according to Roddenberry, on religious grounds. But he began working with a publisher, I think with Pocket Books or Bantam, it was Pocket Books. He began working with a publisher, Pocket Books, to produce this as a novel, but he was also starting to work on Star Trek Phase 2, which was Paramount's idea to reinvigorate the property by coming up with another TV series. Paramount in 76, 77 was trying to launch their own fourth television network. At the time, there was ABC, NBC, CBS. They wanted to do like a Saturday night network where they would lease time on independent local stations and broadcast network stuff starting on Saturday nights. This actually would happen in the mid-'80s with Fox. This is how the Fox network got started. But at the time, it was really kind of groundbreaking, and Star Trek Phase 2 was going to be their flagship property. They got everybody back from the main cast except for Leonard Nimoy. Leonard Nimoy was having problems with Paramount, and so decided not to be a part of it. But William Shatner, DeForest Kelley, George Takei, Walter Koenig, Nichelle Nichols, I think Grace Lee Whitney, all of them were coming back in, along with some new characters. They had a Lieutenant Zahn, they had Commander Decker, who would replace Spock, and Lieutenant Ilea, who would also replace Spock. One was the executive officer, and one was the science officer. They got back people who had worked on the original series. Bill Teese, who had done the costumes, was back doing costumes. Matt Jeffries, who was the art director, he was back. Rob Goodwin and Harold Livingston, who were producers, were back producing. And they started to get some scripts together. Alan Dean Foster wrote the pilot, or at least was originally contracted to write the pilot and started, but then Harold Livingston took that over. They were really going in pre-production. They were doing. They had costumes. They had props. They were building sets. And this thing was really ripping. By mid-77, there was a lot of turnover at Paramount. The old Paramount president was out. The new president, Michael Eisner, was in. Eisner thought that the story that was written for the pilot would make actually a great film. It was kind of kicked around for a while, but by 1978, after Star Wars had come out, Paramount announced that there would be a feature film in 1979 starring the original cast. And the pilot's story, which was titled In Thy Image, was basically reworked into the script for Star Trek The Motion Picture. They repurposed the costumes. They rebuilt some of the sets that they had started to work on for Phase 2, and they were off. This is the first time that a TV series had been adapted into a major film starring the original cast after so long a hiatus. It had been over 10 years at that point. Matt Jeffries had redesigned the Enterprise. There was talk about coming up with a completely new ship, but Roddenberry insisted on keeping the same ship and keeping Jeffries' design. Andrew Probert, who's a well-known concept designer, came in and refined it a little bit. Paramount built the models in-house. One of their in-house subsidiaries, Magicam, wound up building the models. The big one was 8 feet long, cost them about $150,000 in 1978 to build it. They made smaller ones. They made models of the shuttles. They made models of V'ger. Bill Teese, who was the the costume designer on Star Trek and was working on Phase 2, did not have time to work on a major film, so they brought in a new costume designer, Robert Fleischer, who developed the uniforms. Roddenberry's idea was that in the future, clothes would be disposable, which is why everybody looks like they're wearing their pajamas. That and the fact that it was, it was the 1970s, so pale colors, pastels, gabardines. This was all kind of stuff that was in vogue at the time. Nimoy, once it became clear that this was going to be a film, they were able to go back and renegotiate with Leonard Nimoy, and he came back in for the film. They updated his makeup and everything revolving around basically all of the makeup, because it was going to, instead of being on a small standard definition TV screen, it was going to be on a big movie screen, so you had to make sure that the makeup and everything were absolutely perfect. So they completely reinvented Spock's makeup. They started filming in August of 1978. There was the director was Robert Wise. Robert Wise was a film editor who edited Citizen Kane. He then became a director, most notably directed West Side Story. They were on a really tight schedule with this film. Paramount had made commitments to exhibitors, to movie theaters, that this film would be out and ready to go on December 7th, 1979. It left them about a year and a half from the day production started to getting a finished film done, which on a film like this at that point was a crazy tight schedule. There was going to be a lot of post-production in this film and not a lot of time to get it done. So they basically shot all the bridge scenes first. They shot the transporter room scenes. The scenes that were set on Vulcan were out at Yellowstone National Park. This film was constantly behind schedule, constantly running into production delays, effects delays. A lot of the effects were done in camera, stuff like the explosions on the bridge, which were done using Brillo pads and arc welders. Actors that were scheduled for 2 or 3 weeks wound up having to stay for 10, 12 weeks, which led to cost overruns. Persis Khambatta, who was cast as Ilea, wound up getting sick in the shower scene. Originally, they were going to have her film it nude. She refused to do it. If you want a little more understanding of that, I suggest you read the novelization by Gene Roddenberry, because it's different. Film finally wrapped production in January of 1979. Doug Trumbull, who had worked on 2001: A Space Odyssey with Stanley Kubrick, was responsible for filming of the Enterprise and the models, and his point of view was he wanted all those visuals to stand for themselves without having any dialogue. That's flyby sequence of the Enterprise. I mean, I think it's 8 minutes long. I mean, it's a really long piece of film where nobody says anything, and you're just basically just flying around this model, and it is amazing, and I will watch every minute of it whenever it's on. Trumbull contracted a lot of the stuff out to a company called Apogee, which was run by John Dykstra, who was the guy who had basically done all the model filming for Star Wars and had invented the motion control camera that was used, which was actually called the Dystraflex. So this is the team that's working on the special effects, but these things took an awful lot of time. Due to the fact that they got this thing done at the last minute, the studio never had any test screenings. The first time anybody saw this film was actually at the premiere, December 6th in Washington, D.C. Robert Wise showed up with a print of the film in his car. So let's talk about the actual movie for a few minutes. Science fiction at its best is something that points a lens at our humanity based on some kind of conditions that don't occur, whether it's technology, whether it's exploring other planets, whether it's alien life or robots. That's what this film kind of does. This takes a look at who we are through the lens of V'ger, and especially through Spock. Spock is kind of one of the point of view characters here. It's basically this thing that he's been searching for his entire life. This divorcing of himself from all emotion and pouring into logic only which ultimately leaves him wanting.
I saw Vidra's planet. A planet populated by living machines. Unbelievable technology. Vidra has knowledge that spans this universe. And yet, with all its pure logic, Vidra is barren. Cold. No mystery. No beauty.
And we find out that what's really important to him is the people around him and not so much this pursuit of logic. It's really kind of this deep existential crisis that he's been having, and he, like V'ger, didn't understand the proper question in order to get the proper answer. It's kind of like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy or something. He discovers that V'ger has been asking these questions and not getting any answers.
This simple feeling is beyond Vidra's comprehension. No meaning, no hope. And Jim, no answers. It's asking questions.
What questions?
Is this all that I am? Is there nothing more?
And so this film has this really kind of deep existential crisis at its heart. And that is something that really good science fiction tends to do, is to kind of point that lens inward at us. And then, of course, also we get, all the other stuff that goes along with Star Trek, the bickering between him and McCoy, the curmudgeonly old doctor.
Well, for a man who swore he'd never return to Starfleet.
Just a moment, Captain, sir. I'll explain what happened. Your revered Admiral Nagura invoked a little-known, seldom-used reserve activation clause. In simpler language, Captain, they drafted me.
They didn't.
This was your idea. This was your idea, wasn't it?
Bones is a thing out there.
Why is any object we don't understand always called a thing?
We get to see all of our heroes again, Sulu and Chekhov and Uhura and even Rand. And it's good to see all these people again. We get this kind of new version of the Enterprise. I talked about that. We get this new look, this new motif that's going on, this new aesthetic, if you will. It just tells us that the scale has been increased, that we've taken this whole thing up a notch. I really enjoyed it. I mean, this is such a great movie. And yeah, it's a difficult watch for a modern audience, especially somebody who's not used to like the cinema of the 70s, because it is very much a 70s film. It's slow paced. It's a lot of conversation. It takes its time getting to where it's going. But at the end of the day, it is such a thoughtful and significant piece of art that it's hard to not place this, for me, near the top of the pantheon of great sci-fi and of Star Trek films. So the film was released to the public on December 7th. Opening weekend, it did $11 million on a $44 million budget, wound up doing $139 million in its first run at the box office. Got mainly mixed reviews. Some people liked it, some people didn't. Roger Ebert said it was fun, it was a good time. Judith Martin said it was there wasn't enough plot to support the length of the film. Other people said that it was pretentious, but a lot of people liked it, liked the action, liked the kind of the deep story in it and the kind of existential threads in it. Even though it made money, it didn't make really enough money. There was a lot of promotional work on this. They were amortizing the cost of the Phase 2 build-outs into it. They decided they wanted, because of the reception, they decided that they wanted to go forth and continue to do films, but they didn't want to spend this kind of money on films, so they handed the whole franchise over to Paramount's television division. A guy named Harb Bennett was the producer, and Bennett would go on and produce the next few films using the TV department for much, much cheaper. And honestly, that's okay, because those next couple of films are really pretty fantastic. So that's it. That is 1979 in a nutshell, or at least 5 films that I think are worthy of a watch and worthy of a revisit if you haven't seen any of these films. So go back and watch these films. All That Jazz, The Warriors, The Black Hole, Apocalypse Now, Star Trek The Motion Picture. Thank you for listening, allowing me to ramble on, and we will talk to you on the next episode.